Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another fantastic episode of Anarchy Among Friends Roundtable discussion. Before we get started, let me first remind you that we are covered by the BIPCOT no government license, one except for governments and the bludgies thereof. You can learn more about that at bipcot.org. That is BIPCOT.org. We're also protected by Brandenburg v. Ohio, 1969, which ruled that the government cannot punish inflammatory speech unless that speech is, quote, directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. Therefore, everything said here on Anarchy Among Friends Roundtable discussion is entirely hypothetical.
Well, I mean, nobody's going to take us seriously.
If you're taking us seriously, you're listening to the wrong podcast.
Yeah,
Well, no. If you're taking us seriously, you need to reevaluate your life.
Evaluate your life decisions that have led you to this point where you're taking us seriously. Because, seriously.
You need to do like a matrix detox and take the blue pill for just a minute and chill.
Yeah.
No. But this is episode 141, which we're recording on the 4th of July because that's what we do, I guess.
Happy Treason Day, everybody.
It's only treason if you lose. And
That's true.
And then it's Happy Rebellion Day.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Well, hey, they still celebrate Guy Fawkes Day in Britain, and he lost. So, yeah.
Well, he was kind of a douchebag.
Well, he was also, obviously a what's the word that he supported the Pope? A papist, I think, maybe. I don't know, something like that is what it was.
I don't know. It's a fancy word. Why would I know it?
I don't know. It's like that he wanted to get rid of the monarchy, and that was like Protestant, and reinstill like a Catholic monarchy, and so he's going to blow up the House of Commons or whatever, the House of Lords, and
he was going
Parliament.
He wanted to get rid of the king, so the line of succession would drop to his niece.
Yeah, who is a Catholic.
The niece was a friend of the church.
Yeah, so so anybody like that's where the irony is of the Guy Fawkes thing is, like, a lot of people celebrate that and they ignore the fact that what he really was, it's obviously it's morphed now, but what he really was a papist monarchist piece of shit.
Yeah.
So
not too far off from some of the founding fathers.
That is true. That is true. But they were also rebel scum, and I'm wearing my George Washington hat currently. My hat, it has three corners. Three corners has my hat, as well as my vest. I did take the actual plates out because that was just going to be really uncomfortable to sit for 2 hours with plates in. But I got my patches and stuff. So for my meme-based insurgency with George Washington rocking an AR.
Would George be an AR guy though?
I feel like he would. I feel like he would be an AR guy. I don't know. Actually, no. I think he'd actually probably have like a fucking HK. He seems like that kind of an elitist. He'd probably be or an FN.
He did become a general because he had the uniform and the money.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was how he became a general back then. I mean, the Marquis de Lafayette, even, who's famous, who's pretty much responsible for the entire reason that the colonial army knew how to fight at all, had lied and said he'd been a general in like the French army and everything else, and that he was a French aristocrat and all this other stuff, and he totally fucking wasn't.
No.
He made it all up, but by the time anybody found out he'd done so much good for the Continental Army, they just kind of let it go.
That's true. So yeah, he would be an elitist. He'd probably have HK, 416.
Yeah, I could see, or an FN. Either an HK or an FN. He'd probably have like an HK 416, and then like in the FN 57 as his sidearm.
I'm about 5'7".
Really, you don't think he'd be a 5'7" guy? I feel like he'd be a 5'7" guy.
Gold-plated 45.
He'd have like a gold-plated like bedazzled.
What's the Trump 45? but it just says 01 on the side.
Yeah. Well, yeah. He'd have a model 1900.
There you go.
Instead of a 1911, he'd have a model 1900, and because he's President Zero essentially. So
there you go.
Well, he's actually the third president? Yeah, he's technically the third president of the United States. He's just the first president under the Constitution.
Yeah, which was a coup, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't. Would he be an AK or an AK? No, I don't think he'd be an AK guy.
Oh,
really.
He'd definitely not be an AK guy.
No,
I don't think he'd be an AK guy. I think AK is kind of I think Lincoln would be an AK guy. Because Lincoln was a really, really big fan of Marx.
That's true.
So I think Lincoln would be an AK guy, but I don't think Washington would be, because I think the AKs are too pedestrian. Right? Washington would be all about that bougie gear.
The bougie gear?
Yeah. He'd be rocking like the highest end tridge, the highest end fucking. Actually, he'd probably have a scar. Now that I think about it, he'd have a scar.
A scar, yeah. rocking some level 4 frass plates.
Yeah, hardcore. He'd be one of those hardcore, like, I'm gonna flex on the pores kind of guys.
Rolling in a convertible Humvee.
He'd have one of those the converted Humvees that are made way nicer by Mil-Spec Motors. He'd have one of those, and
with seat covers.
Yeah, it'd be seat cover. He'd have fuzzy dice. He'd be like, "What up, home dog?" As he gets.
No.
Yeah, this is definitely the way the founding fathers want to be thought of.
The militia boys. So the militia boys that have AKs.
Oh yeah,
the regular army would be rocking like PSAs or something.
Oh, are you kidding me? They'd probably have like fucking M1 Garands from the several wars ago, and they just beat to shit. A few M1 carbines.
Rusty surplus ammo.
Yeah, it'd be like Ethiopian 30-06. Like just be half fires galore.
Half the primers are dimpled.
Pretty much. Yeah, the Continental Army did not have money. We'll put it that way. They did not have money. There's multiple times where the Continental Army almost disbands because they couldn't be paid and they couldn't be fed, and they're like living on rations of like spruce beer, which is actually really good. If you've never had spruce beer, it's not bad. It's a new beer. It's really low in alcohol, but it's because it's boiled and everything else. It's safer than water.
Well, they didn't have regular water purification at that point in time.
Yeah, so they made like spruce tip beer, and it's really citrusy. It actually doesn't taste like spruce. It's a really citrusy thing. It's
spruce or pine needles are higher in vitamin C than lemons.
Yeah, so it's that's what they tended to drink, and they tend to eat like a lot of hardtack, which is so hard you could literally drive a nail with it. They actually drank a lot of rum. A lot of people don't realize the actual alcohol that kind of drove the American economy through the rebellion and things, and that really funded the revolution, was not whiskey, because whiskey was kind of still a pretty esoteric thing at the time. It was fucking rum. Just tons and tons and tons of rum. And there's still a couple of distilleries left in there's one on
well, that would make sense, because Spain controlled Florida at the time, right? And sugar cane's a natural growing product. So I mean, that it would make sense that rum would be more favored than, or more readily available than whiskey, which was corn.
Yep. Oh yeah, it was.
So, I'm sure they had corn cultivation, but I'm sure that the sugar content of the corn at that point in time was far less than what we're used to now.
Well, yeah, that and the rum. A lot of people in the colonies had taste for rum, because rum was a very common thing for sailors to drink. And obviously maritime is going to be really, really huge when you're 13 colonies that are all set pretty much almost entirely, with the exception of like Connecticut, set on the ocean. Seagoing, seafaring is a very big thing for you. So everybody kind of had this taste for rum specifically, and it was easy to get their hands on. You could send rum runners down to the Caribbean to get it, and then they'd run the British blockade to come back up and hit Georgia or South Carolina to drop off their stores and little coves and things. And there's still a couple distilleries that exist on Curacao and a couple other places that existed at the time and actually ran rum to the colonies during the Revolution, which is kind of cool. Kilo Kai is the name of one of them that's still made in one of those distilleries. And I don't know if they have any of the original equipment left, but it's really cool that it's still there. Like
the old copper still.
Yeah, that George Washington himself may once have consumed rum out of this still.
If you shake it, you can hear his wooden teeth in the bottom.
Yeah. His Thomas Jefferson's slaves were sent down here. It's I love that shit when conservatives are like, well, we just need to get back to the way the Constitution originally was. And I'm like, you mean where only white male landowners over the age of 21 had any say?
Protestant male landowners.
Yeah, you want to get back to that? Okay, I mean, if you say so, I guess.
What's that? You want a standing army? Get up against the wall, bitch.
Yeah, it also included none of that, and also no income tax, which is nice.
Speaking of tax, just on a quick note, we're not really going to get into it. West Virginia had a law go into effect on the 1st that removes sale tax on firearms and ammunition purchases.
Huh.
Like, holy fucking shit. It also created tax breaks for firearms and ammunition manufacturers within the state.
West Virginia's gearing up for some shit, man.
Well, West Virginia's always been, a little fuck you, leave us alone-ish.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the whole reason they wound up that West Virginia exists. They were part of Virginia until the late 19th century when they broke away as a direct result of the Civil War, because they didn't want to join Virginia. Those counties were like, no, fuck you. Everybody's been leaving us alone because no one can get here because we're nothing but mountains. So if we rebel, people are going to start coming here. Screw you.
It's hard to call those mountains, but yeah.
Well, they are. I mean, if you've ever had to walk up one, I assure you, it's a mountain.
What's the highest peak in the Appalachians?
It's not very big. Isn't it like Mount? It's like Lookout or something, or
Mount Mitchell, 5,268 feet.
That is not tall.
Okay, that is in Maine, and then Mount Washington, 6,288. But those are way north. So.
Yeah, that's there. Most of the stuff down there is, the Appalachians are not very tall particularly, but they are still mountains. They are still very rough, and if you're on nothing but foot, it's a hell of a terrain to try and cover.
Yeah, Lake Tahoe's at 6,200. So.
Yeah, the Rockies are much taller.
That's the Sierras.
Or Sierra, whatever. It's the chain in the West, man. I don't know. It's like with the Appalachian. I call them all Appalachians, but they're not. There's not. There's the Great Smoky Mountains, and there's the Blue Ridge Mountains, and there's fucking, I don't care. It's all one big string of pointy bits. All right, that's.
Don't want to walk up them. Don't want to climb down them.
I definitely don't. I have had to walk up some of the mountains in the Great
Smokies. That's right. You were stationed in Georgia.
Yeah, and North Carolina. So I have had to go up and over the Great Smoky Mountains and the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I'll tell you what, it sucks on foot.
Aren't you glad you weren't dragging a cannon up that?
Yeah, those poor freaking mules and horses and trying to pull everything up and lug everything, and everybody just trying to carry all. I mean, it's no wonder so many of them just dumped stuff. I mean, the early days of the Civil War is just one story after another leading up to the battles of all of these soldiers just dumping millions of dollars worth of gear on the side of the road and being like, I'll probably come back for it. They never came back for it.
That's one of the things when I learned when I was backpacking. It's like, ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pound, and you learn real quick what you can do without.
Oh yeah, that was a big thing. Like when we found the like Hillinox or something like that products. They make camp chairs and cots that are like this super duper like lightweight space age aluminum. And we found those and they weigh like a pound, 1.1 pounds. That's it for a chair. You can pick the cot up with one hand and hold it in the air.
Yeah.
Like those things make such a fucking difference.
Arc'teryx, that's another one that saved you a lot of ounces.
Oh, anything that's super lightweight is super nice. That's the other thing, like people don't get why lightweight like battle weapon is so important. Where they're like, oh, that M1 Garand though, it felt real solid. It also weighed like 8 fucking pounds, 8.5 pounds. Are you kidding me? Like, and that's just to the receiver, and then you throw wood on, you throw ammunition on, you throw all this other shit. The BAR itself is like what 12 pounds, something like that, 16 pounds. I mean, they all weigh so fucking much weight, and you don't want to lug that around. Screw that. That is heavy, man. Like, okay, well, yeah, picking it up and carrying it at the range is fine, but if you got to lug that thing,
the Garand was 9.5 pounds.
Yeah, 9.5 pounds. Imagine carrying 9.5. Doesn't sound like much, maybe, but imagine carrying that across France.
Like carry 9.5 pounds for 8 hours.
Just for 8 hours, yeah. And that's on top of all the other gear you're carrying. Because it's not like most infantry are going to have vehicles following them or anything else to carry any other gear. Like when you're infantry, everything's on your back, man. Like you got to carry it all. That's the other reason why, like during the Revolutionary War, it was really big that for the colonists that, the rebels, that they were able to fight so close to home. They didn't have to carry as much gear out into the field because you could always swing by places and grab things. So as long as you had helpful people nearby, you didn't need to bring that much food. You didn't need to bring all that much gear because you could just go get stuff from somebody else real quick. And it's just a couple of miles away. That makes a big damn difference. Big difference.
Let's see. According to Britannica.com, the musket, which is the muzzle loading shoulder firearm. Let's see. It weighed. Such a weapon was typically 5.5 feet long and weighed about 20 pounds.
They are not light and they are not small.
And it fired a 2-ounce 57-grain ball.
Yep.
2 ounces, 57-gram ball. 175. Yeah, 175 yards.
Yeah, they were like they ranged. Well, and the funny thing is they were all handmade. So the guns as they were sold with molds for musket balls.
Yes.
Because no two barrels were exactly the same caliber.
We have a story about that in a minute. You want to get into that one and then get into the.
Yeah, we might as well.
Since you mentioned it, so it's Independence Day, Freedom Day, whatever the fuck you want to call it. It exists because this is the day in which the Declaration of Independence was signed. Right, it's not the day it was written. That was July 2nd, but it's the day that it was signed.
Oh shit, that's due tomorrow. Thomas Jefferson, July 3rd.
So on July 9th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was read for the first time in New York in front of George Washington and his troops. In reaction to what had been read, soldiers and citizens went to Bowling Green, which is a park in Manhattan, where a lead statue of King George III on horseback stood. The mob of people pulled down the statue, and later the lead was melted down to make musket balls or bullets for use in the war for independence. Careful records were kept, and it's known that 42,088 bullets were made.
Yeah, this looks like it could be useful. Like, you made a lead statue. You might as well have said, melt me down into bullets. Well, and I mean that's a pretty damn big statue too, because I mean you think about, again, these things ranged in caliber from roughly 54 to as much as like 64 caliber. These are huge balls.
Was it 54 to 76?
That's a huge 76 would be a gigantic fucking round.
Yeah.
I mean, they're moving slower than hell, but and they're not rifled generally.
All that was left of the statue are a few fragments that broke off when it hit the ground. The statue only stood erect in Bowling Green for 6 years, as it was originally commissioned to celebrate the repeal of the Stamp Act in 1766.
What kind of a fucking narcissist goes, I want a statue of myself to commemorate my great benevolence in repealing an act that I put in place in the first fucking place?
For those that don't know, the Stamp Act was act of British Parliament in 1765 that exacted revenue from the American colonies by imposing a stamp duty on newspapers and legal and commercial documents.
Yep, basically.
Right? So it only lasts for a year,
and people are tarred and feathered over it.
Yeah, big time.
It's because, I mean, you got to remember too that you might go, oh, well, it's only for like legal and business documents, but consider how many legal and business documents were being required at the time. I mean, you're talking about everything you do. Yeah. And newspapers. Newspapers is the only media at the time. So it's the only way that you can communicate on a mass scale with anybody. And on top of that, you're talking about wills and contracts and all of this stuff that was necessary to keep the economy of the colonies going is now suddenly being taxed. And taxed at a pretty considerable rate compared to what anything had been taxed before. Now, compared to now, it's nothing. Like, people wouldn't even blink at that now. But back then, that was a big fucking deal.
Yeah, fucking my gas tax here in California just went up 50 cents a gallon. And there's no protests anywhere.
And it's how much do you pay per gallon normally?
I saw the cheapest I saw yesterday was $4.39.
So figure probably what $3 is really what you're actually paying for the gas itself.
We have the state tax right now is like 89 cents or 88 cents, and then some counties and cities have taxes.
So yeah, so probably I'm gonna guess around $3. So if it's $3 and it just went up by 50 cents, I mean that's that's already a what, or 160% increase over what the tax was for the paper.
Ridiculous.
So it's and no one's batting an eye because we've lost our balls.
Yep. So, but this little snippet, history snippet says the incident was symbolic because it showed that Americans were ready to be independent and free from tyrannical rule, but also by pulling down the statue of the king, it was a symbolic gesture to make historic change from the rule of monarchy to the rule of a democracy.
Which is still an oppressive tyranny, but Yep.
And don't forget that there were some people in Congress, American Congress at the time. I don't have to say American Congress because England doesn't have Congress, they have a parliament. But either way, in Congress at the time that wanted George Washington to be king.
Yes. They also tried, I forget who it was, but there's actually a like fifth in line for the throne minor monarch from, I think, France that they actually offered a kingship to as well, to try and get him to come be king of America. And it's one of those little tidbits of American history they like to ignore, that they did try for just a new monarchy initially. And then when that dude from France turned it down and Washington was like, no, at that point they said, okay, well, fine, I guess we're gonna try this new experimental thing that we just came up with. I mean, keep in mind, Washington was still referred to throughout his presidency as Your Excellency.
Yes.
So
but then they wrote the Constitution and stole the rights of the states, and
that was in 1789.
Because the Constitution is a coup. The Articles
and then
of Confederation had much stronger language that would have limited the federal government.
And then in 1812, we waged an aggressive war against Canada. That didn't go so well initially, and then we ultimately still won, but sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They cut off our maple syrup.
Well, but that's one of those things that, again, that you don't really learn much in American schools about the War of 1812. Well, in any schools, anywhere in the country, really, because it's kind of an embarrassment to admit that, yeah, so the country was like 20 years old and immediately went, hey, we're going to go to war with this other country and try and take over Canada. And that's kind of an embarrassing thing to mention, that's how the War of 1812 started, was America actually invaded Toronto. So there's a really good book about it called When the Irish Invaded Canada, because the initial invasion force was like all Irish immigrants. And it's a really good book about it. It talks about the explosion in Toronto at the garrison there and stuff, and when then American soldiers proceeded to go like full Gestapo on the citizenry around them and blaming everybody as insurgents for having set off the explosion.
Went on to become the very thing that, like 20 years earlier,
yep,
they had fought a war over.
Yep, within 20 years already that had happened.
Yeah.
So,
well, 30 years, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Well, under the Constitution, so under the United States as we know it now, 1789, to 19 or 1812. So it's not very long, and we're already going, we're going to go to war.
Then there was a little Risky Rebellion, and then there's a little Civil War, and the invasion of Mexico, and the invasion of Cuba, and
well, the invasion of Mexico came before the Civil War.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because that's actually where Robert E. Lee got kind of famous. Was
I'm public school funded, so
yeah.
All right, you want to get into this?
Yeah.
You want to read it, or
which article are we on?
We're just gonna read the DOI and break and talk about it. And
I took my hat off. Hang on a second. Can I get my hat back? I don't know. Can I get my hat back on?
Just
I feel like just pop it up there. Does that work? In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume, among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
Okay, well, they literally just said that when the government infringes on your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it is your duty to yeet that government and to seek your own representation.
Yep. Was it the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Yes,
so change it to what you want.
To yeet the current government.
The right of the people to yeet their government shall not be infringed.
And to create your own happiness. Yes.
Let's see, where was I? Blah 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 blah. The mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object The same object evidence is a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferances of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
Okay, this is so beautifully written, and I don't know why anarchists, especially anarchists, dismiss this document. It is a fantastic document. The language in it is anarchist. It is very much anarchist in nature, or at least libertarian in nature.
It's libertarian in nature. It's definitely not. I wouldn't say it's anarchist because I mean Thomas Paine was an anarchist.
Voluntarist in nature.
Sort of, right? Yeah. I mean, consent to the governed is a big theme here.
Well, so the original use of the word voluntarist was a voluntarily funded government.
So. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's just it. You got to remember, like Thomas Paine, who was very much a founding father. He was
give me liberty or give me death.
No, that was not Thomas.
How was who?
That was that Hancock? Who was that? I don't think that was Paine.
That was Common Sense.
No, he actually said, let me Google that shit. Hang on a second. Who said give me liberty or give me death? That was actually a speech from Patrick Henry.
Oh, Patrick Henry.
Yep.
Close enough.
I mean, I guess. But
public school education, I'm telling you.
Yeah, it's well. I mean, in a lot of people, a lot of people, a lot of this stuff kind of runs together, and it's easy for them to get confused.
Yes.
He has, so talking about King George here, he has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation, till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. So big. The only time he was even willing to do anything was if you went, okay, well, I'll give up the rest of my rights.
Yes.
In exchange.
He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. Literally says the government was operating in secret.
Yep. They operated in secret, and they went out of their way to make redressing your grievances so incredibly complicated and difficult and time consuming and everything else that no one in the colonies could do it.
Yep. Refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts people, meaning unless you're willing to give up some of your rights, the government was not going to help you.
Yep, they weren't going to care. They weren't going to give a flying fuck about you.
That also sounds very familiar.
Gosh, does it? Does it sound familiar? I can't think of any other government that would do something like that. I mean, certainly not an American government, right?
Yeah. Operating in secret. The government totally doesn't do that now. Never operates in secret. Totally not. Hello, Mr. FBI listening guy. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions of the rights of the people. Meaning he has gotten rid of politicians because they disagree with him. That totally doesn't sound familiar either. Like,
I don't think we just covered something that was exactly that.
Like the politician in Nevada who had her voice and vote taken away because she refused to wear a mask.
Gosh, that sounds... No, that would never happen in America, right?
No, that's not happening in America.
Let's see. He has refused for a long time after such disillusions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. So not only did he take away the representatives, but then when they were like, hey, we don't have anybody here to like voice our concerns to like get, I don't know, maybe military protection for the impending invasions from like Spain, France, native tribes that are pissed that we're invading their land. And he didn't bother to send anybody and just left us to our own fucking devices. And it's kind of one of those, well, fine then, if that's what you want, then we don't really need you at all, do we? Because what's the point of you?
Yeah, we want your taxes, but we ain't gonna fucking help you.
Yep, you're totally on your own. You're gonna pay for all of this. And keep in mind, I mean, a lot of these taxes were in fact because the British had come to the Americans' aid during the 7 Years' War. And it was to basically for the British Crown to pay itself back for all of the money it spent on the 7 Years' War. And that was their justification for it. So they were like, well, we already protected you from one invasion. Why should we have to do anything else? You still haven't paid us for that. And they're like, because you say that you protect us, and maybe you're supposed to do that?
Totally not happening here in the United States.
Yeah. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. So if that one doesn't make much sense, what they're complaining about is they need people. They need immigrants. They need people to be able to show up and help out.
Give us your towel, you're poor, you're hungry.
Yeah, and instead, George, their complaint is that George instead went out of his way to actively prevent people from moving to the colonies, to prevent immigration, to make it so hard to immigrate that no one wanted to do it. Isn't that interesting that one of their complaints was
not enough immigration?
Yeah, not enough immigration. How dare you get in the way of immigration?
He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers, which means that the king and parliament would not pass laws establishing new courts and new ways of enforcing the protection of people's liberty in the colonies.
Yeah, they said, well, the colonies can't govern themselves, but then also didn't want to help the colonies by sending anybody to govern them.
Yes.
They're like, nope, you're on your own. Pay me, but you're on your own.
It's like the mafia.
Yeah, I'm not going to help, except the mafia even would help you. Like if you, if you own
the mafia would help you if there was another family moving in.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're paying protection money, that's the funny thing is like if you're a business who is paying protection money to the mafia, if somebody's robbing you and you tell the mafia, hey, these people are robbing me, they will stop those thieves. They will probably shoot them.
Yeah,
they will stop. They will protect you. Now, granted, part of it is you're protecting yourself from what they'll do if you don't pay them to protect you, but they will actually protect you.
Yeah.
So.
All right. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. Meaning that old George decided who would be the judges of given areas and what they were being paid and everything else. So instead of the communities, the people living in the area deciding who would be their judge and what they were paid and all that good stuff, old George, 3,000 miles away, sitting on his golden throne, he got to decide.
Yeah, he got to be the one to dictate who was going to decide what was and wasn't justice in your area, not you. Even though he didn't live there, he had suffered none of the consequences, he had nothing to do with any of it. He got to decide. Not the people who lived there.
That sounds awfully familiar to federal appointee positions.
Does it?
People in D.C. appointing judges in, like Seattle and San Francisco and Arizona.
Gosh, no. Yeah. And we know how well it works out when you have people who live so far away that they don't understand a giving community. They don't understand its needs. They don't understand any of this, making all of these important decisions for that community. We know how well that works out.
Yeah. All right. Here's a good one. This is good. I'm going to go off on this one. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substances. ATF, Bureau of Land Management, Department of Education, Department of Commerce, the IRS, etc., 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 etc. Oh, fuck the EPA.
I mean, you want to talk about somebody, a multitude of offices sent out hither, swarms of officers, like the EPA and all of their bullshit. I mean,
the EPA is the most overpowered and over-budgeted and underproducing agency that the federal government has.
Hell, half the time remember they poison 2 fucking rivers. Them.
Yeah. Bureau of Land Management is up there too. Most of the people on the East Coast, they don't really understand. They don't know the Bureau of Land Management. They don't understand it. But the Bureau of Land Management claims control over like 52% of the Western United States. The Bureau of Land Management, controls 92% of the state of Nevada. It's not the state of Nevada. It's the Highway 80 of Nevada and the Las Vegas of Nevada, and then everything else is Bureau of Land Management.
Oh yeah, completely. It's all federal land out there. It's all federal land out there.
Oh, all right. Oh, next one's you. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislators. Such that would not happen here because, we have the War Powers Act, so that totally prevents the standing armies without consent of our legislators, right, Andrew?
Oh, and it's not like police that are armed with MRAPs and tanks and helicopters and drones, and it's not that's not a standing army, right? It's among us. No, not that. Yeah, and I mean, you don't need the National Guard. I mean, look at they fucking violated the living hell out of that in the Civil War.
Yeah. More recently, look at Hurricane Katrina. They went door-to-door gun confiscation, all that other bullshit.
Tell me that's and don't forget during Hurricane Katrina, you can see why I took off my vest. By the way.
I saw you sweating your ass off.
Oh yeah, it got a little hot. Because there's no AC vent coming in here
in that room.
And so when that door is closed, this room is whatever the outside temperature is, which is about 94 degrees.
Yeah, my window's right there, and my fan's right here, and it's hot. Yeah, I understand.
But during the American Civil War, the war powers and the idea of posse comitatus was completely disregarded and thrown out the window.
Yeah. Here's the next one too. The next one goes right along with that.
Yeah. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power.
Jesus. The military independent of and superior to the civil power, meaning that the British soldiers had more power and authority than the colonial leaders.
If that doesn't sound familiar, it's a matter of national security, ma'am.
Yeah, there's a reason that the Third Amendment exists, and it's because of shit like that.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too, though, is like it can be very sneaky things. These violations were not totally as blatant as, oh, if a British soldier shows up at your house, you have to give him a place to sleep. It's much more nefarious more often than not.
You have to give him a place to sleep, and you can't call like the county sheriff, because the soldier, the military, has a higher authority than your domestic and executive, your domestic law protection.
See, in that and that seems pretty blatant and pretty obvious, but you got to remember there was a lot of other things that were much sneakier that were happening. There was where a military governor could be established, and he would actually be superior to the local civilian governor. Or if somebody was accused of something, right? Like if a British soldier is accused of something, he can't necessarily be tried by a civilian court. The military gets first call. That should sound familiar. Of whether or not they're even going to charge him with anything. That was a big thing with the Boston Massacre, with the fact that those soldiers were actually being tried. Like the British Army basically had to acquiesce in order for that to happen. They could have said, no, you're not allowed to charge any of these people. Of course, they also understood that if they did, they would be solidifying that Boston was going to go into open rebellion immediately. So they didn't, but they did have that legal option that they could have said, no, you're not allowed to charge any of these men flat out. And there's nothing the civil courts could have done about it because the military outranks them constantly. And we have that now with national security, where if something's a matter of national security, the military forces, the Department of Defense, can compel just about any civilian agency whatsoever to cooperate with them.
Yeah, you have a story about that, about getting pulled over and going to jail and
and
making a call, and now the guy's no longer a cop.
Yeah, because I was under orders. I was being transferred. He interfered with a lawful transfer from one duty station to another of an American military member. You're not allowed to do that. So I just had to make the call and be like, yeah, so this happened and the judge is helping out and none of the jailers are listening. And can you guys come take care of this for me? And they took care of it. Suffice it to say they took care of it. And I didn't stay in jail very long. Yeah, and I was locked up in Georgia because the whole reason he threw me in jail was because I had allowed my insurance policy to lapse on my car.
Yeah. Let's see. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent of their laws of pretend legislation. Meaning that he made shit up and enforced it, despite that it was illegal.
Yeah, and you have to remember that his assent is what they're talking about is like his endorsement, right? Like he was backing that, backing them. So by decree. Yeah, so rather than having people who are, not only was he appointing their governors, not only was he having his military be in charge, not only
governors and judges.
Yeah, not only was he doing all of that from 3,000 miles away, but simultaneously then he was also passing laws disregarding anything that they had at all and going, nope, this is now what counts. Regardless of what the colonists had said, what other laws said, it didn't matter. That's what happens when we have an absolute ruler like that.
Yeah. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us.
NYPD.
Yeah. Again, this is the reason the Third Amendment exists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you do have to remember that this is often that phrase is a little more nefarious than, it might seem. Like, it isn't as obvious. The quartering the troops isn't as obvious as a large number of uniformed redcoats marching around. It can be military governors who get to show up at these manor houses and just go, hey, I'm going to take this entire wing of your house over.
Yep. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, and for quartering or for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states.
That was a big accusation on the trial of the guys who performed the Boston Massacre. Again, one of the Adamses actually defended them, while another one was trying to convince everybody to lynch them.
One was right, one was wrong.
Yeah. And that was the big thing is also when Adams was asked to defend them, he was asked to defend them like basically by the Sons of Liberty. They were like, we need to allow the rule of law and an actual trial to happen of these men, because if we don't, we are no better than they are. We have to allow that to happen. We have to give them fair and just, fair justice, and we have to truly defend them. They have to be truly defended. So I need you to truly do this.
Just go along and take your day in court.
Yeah. But I mean, that was a time when that still mattered. Like when that was so important for them to do, because they needed to declare, to the world, in addition to the British, we believe in justice. We believe in law, in the rule of law, and in fairness. And like, this is not an aristocratic society where they're just going to walk. Or they're just going to be declared to be guilty. They're going to have a true trial. We're going to stand on this. They had to do that to show that they really meant what they said when they talked about their ideals and their principles. They had to, because if they didn't, why would anyone believe them? Oh yeah, you care about freedom. You can't even give these guys a fair trial.
Let's see. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world.
Yep. And that pretty much, that is what happened. You weren't, and what's funny is, don't forget, the modern United States has that fun little law where if a ship is going from one American port to another, it has to be crewed by Americans.
Which is fucking retarded. That's the reason for the what is the law that they just set aside
the same one. Yeah, there's another one
regarding cruise ships.
Yep, there's another one that does the same thing with travel, where you're not allowed to basically go from one American port to another unless the ship is American built and unless it's crewed by Americans.
Yeah,
this is exactly the kind of thing that they were talking about here, where the British would not allow American colonies to trade directly with other countries. It had to be from Britain.
Yeah.
So even if you were buying it from the Caribbean, right? That's again with the rum runners. That's where the rum runners became a thing, because an American colony couldn't buy from a French or a Spanish colony in the Caribbean. They couldn't buy rum from them. They had to buy it through a British company that was going and buying that rum that would then take it to them. So it made everything much more expensive in the colonies, much more expensive, because it was going through third parties that it didn't necessarily need to go through. On top of that, it allowed the British to enforce monopolies, things like the British East India Company and the I forget what the British the Hudson Bay Company and stuff like that, like got these exclusive contracts to supply things like tea and furs to the American colonies, and no other company could compete. They weren't allowed to.
Yep. The U.S. does this on so many other countries through sanctions. It's incredulous. It would shock you the number of countries that the U.S. has sanctions on.
Well, yeah, and remember, the reason the British wanted that was because Britain is an island, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of resources. It doesn't have a lot of stuff on its own. So it depended entirely on its colonies for its own economy. I mean, they did the same thing to the British, like the British Caribbean. They did the same thing to, chunks of Asia, India. I mean, where they weren't allowed to trade with anybody else. They had to send it all to Britain because that was the only way the British economy could keep going, is a total vampire.
That's the reason. One of the reasons Hong Kong was created, right?
Yeah, because they needed these exclusive trade deals, or they couldn't survive. They were a failing country even back then, and so rather than go, oh shit, maybe this isn't going to work out real hot for us having this whole empire thing,
let's double down.
Yeah, they just doubled down on it, and that policy lasted until at least the 1980s. It's only fairly recently started to change.
For imposing taxes on us without our consent. I don't think we need to go into depths on that one. Yeah. I think everyone understands that one.
You'll notice no representation is mentioned. It's simply, we didn't consent to this.
Yes. For depriving us, in many cases, of the benefit of a trial by jury. Again, I don't think we really need to go into depths on that one because that happens every day.
Mm-hmm.
For transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses, which means they extracted colonialists to be tried in other places.
There were certain crimes that an American court couldn't try you for. You had to go to Britain for that. So you had a 3-month, what was it, like 3 months ship journey?
Something like that.
In a prison ship in horrible conditions before you were even going to see the inside of a courtroom. And that's if you survived the journey, which you may or may not.
Let's see. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies.
That was Canada.
Canada. Yeah.
In case anyone was curious, they were talking about Canada.
Basically, the king said, "Let there be Canada," and there was Canada.
Yeah, well, and he, the story of Canada is crazy and weird, and and again, this is again, that was something that led to the War of 1812, because as something like 60% of the population of any of the provinces along the other side of the Hudson River and the Great Lakes was American. They didn't even call themselves Canadians until after the War of 1812. They can still consider themselves Americans. And they're now living under this oppressive rule that's being talked about here, and go, hey, you guys should come liberate us. And so America uses that as I don't know if you can hear the war zone outside right now, but there's still a bunch of...
I'm hearing them pop them here. It's still daylight here, and they're fucking blasting them off.
Yeah. That's the 4th, whatever, man. But
it's mess, whatever.
But the whole idea was, oh well, there's all these Americans living here, and all these Americans are pissed off about the way the Brits are ruling Canada, and want to bring the same idea that America is doing to Canada. So hey guys, why don't you invade Canada and come give us, some of that freedom here? Ignoring the fact that the majority of Canadians weren't in on that request. So it's just them.
Let's see. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. Yeah, they still do that, you guys.
Well, yeah, look at how often city councils and things get disbanded or get told, no, you can't have that law by a state, right? The state tells a county, or the county tells a city.
This is another one of those ones. This is a 10th Amendment one right here, or 9th Amendment one, 10th Amendment one or the other.
The enumerated powers.
Yeah, the enumerated powers. Yeah.
Let's see what's after that. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. You don't get to govern yourselves. We get to govern you. Yes. At our pleasure.
Yes, that's totally not a Nancy Pelosi line at all.
Yeah. Well, there was talk here because La Crosse, obviously Wisconsin doesn't even have medical marijuana, right? We got nothing. Yes. And there was in La Crosse, the city I live in, locally decriminalized marijuana just within city limits. It's now that the cops basically, if it's personal use, and I forget how it defines personal use, but if it's personal use, they just write you a ticket. It's like $100 ticket, and that's it.
Yeah.
You just get a fine for a city ordinance violation, and that way they don't have to worry about throwing you in jail for it. They don't freaking care. The state government hollered at La Crosse and said, you can't do that because it's illegal at a state level.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It's like, but if we don't care, we should be able to control what we want in our city. You don't live here. You live in Madison. Screw you.
Yeah. Fuck you, Tony.
Yeah, Tony the Tyrant. Tyranny, it's great. Let's see what's next. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. Well, if you don't like us, we won't come to your aid, but we will attack you.
Yeah. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. That sounds awfully familiar also.
Yeah.
Because the king's army literally attacked the people, just like the United States military attacks its own people.
Well, yeah, there were entire towns, like small towns, in the Northeast, that were burned to the ground by British soldiers before the American Revolution for minor acts of rebellion, and British soldiers just torched it. I mean, that's like, maybe they like concentrated, say, like a bunch of women and children and a few men together in like a church and laid siege to them, burned it to the ground, killed them all. That should sound vaguely familiar.
Waco, motherfuckers. He's talking about Waco.
Yeah.
He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruel and
cruelty and perfidy.
Okay, see, that's public school again. Cruelty and perfidy scarcely parallel in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation.
Yeah, if everything else wasn't bad enough, now, because we're bitching about it, he's hired a bunch of Prussian mercenaries, the Hessians, and is now sending an army of foreign mercenaries to come attack us.
That sounds awfully vaguely familiar.
Hiring a bunch of people to come and attack people for speaking out against the government. Yeah, that does sound rather familiar.
Yeah.
Huh. I think I may have heard of 2 or 3 of those things happening. He has constrained our fellow citizens taking captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioner of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands.
He's Shanghaiing motherfuckers against their will.
Yep. The Irish called it being spirited away. If you've ever read the book Spirited Away or seen the movie that Studio Ghibli did, based on the book, it's about a kidnapped Irish girl because that's what the British like to do to the Irish too. They would press gang you. They would grab you and they would get you drunk, and they would convince you to sign this paper while you were drunk, and then they would take you away and plop you on a ship. You'd wake up in the hold, and well, you're part of the British Navy now.
Yeah, you have a choice: either join us or go over the side.
Yep.
Oh, by the way, you're 30 miles off the coast.
Yeah, so you ain't swimming anywhere, buddy.
Okay,
you gotta work.
He has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages who known rule of warfare is an undistinguishable destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Yes, the king sent emissaries to roving to Indian bands and to try and get them to attack the colonists in some places. He also offered rewards for slaves and to rise up against their masters and to attack those unloyal to the crown. Yeah, insurrection.
Yeah, the weird thing is, and this has always been really like kind of made me chuckle, is a lot of the native tribes sided with the British because in both in the Revolutionary War and in the War of 1812, because they had been trading with them for a while and inexplicably actually believed, and this is the part that makes me laugh, they thought that the British were their best bet for protecting their land.
Yeah. Watch Last of the Mohicans. It has that storyline in it.
Yeah, that was very, very real. And the British very much encouraged, actually that's where scalping started, was because the British said, well, we know how to pay you for your work based on how many enemy scalps you bring.
Yeah.
So they encouraged that behavior. The natives did not do that before.
Yes. You want the next one?
Yeah. Let me.
This is a good one for you.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
Tried all the legal stuff.
Yep. Well, yeah, Benjamin Franklin had gone to repeatedly, Benjamin Franklin had been sent with all of these pleas.
Yeah, making addresses before Parliament.
Yeah,
like
for years.
Like the actual Parliament talking to these people, be like, "Hey, yo, shit's fucked up over there."
Well, and don't forget that Franklin's son was the royal governor of Pennsylvania. Yeah. At the time of the Revolution. He spent more time leading up to the Revolution. Franklin actually spent more time in London than he spent at home in the United States. So what would become the United States, the American colonies. So he very much understood what was at stake. He had, he was always in correspondence with people here in the colonies and pleading the cases to every aristocrat he could find, and traveling to France and to Germany and to Spain and trying to plead the cases to them to put pressure on Britain so that Britain would do something. And they really tried the legal means very, very, very hard.
This is a very Libertarian Party style document and Parliament the complaints. Like we tried the legal stuff. We're trying the legal stuff again and again and again, but you're not listening to us. That's what this document is we tried and tried and tried, but you never fucking listened to us. Now we're going a different path.
Yeah, we tried everything else.
This entire document is a breakup letter. And this is why, and this is why, and this is why, and this is why, and you never fucking listen to us.
I love the way they end that paragraph too, with the way he ends it with the a prince is unfit to rule a free people because princes are always tyrants. Like, it's fucking epic.
Princes always hunger for power.
Well, yeah, but I mean, especially to write that to someone who is convinced that he has been ordained by God himself to rule, to be like, nah, princes are always tyrants. You have no business trying to rule free people.
All right, you want the next one too?
Yeah,
that's a long one. It's a long one.
Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren.
that says right there. That says we never wanted to see you.
Yeah. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have encouraged them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity? That one I don't know. Consanguinity? I don't know. We're gonna go with that.
Like that.
We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends.
Oh, that's the I don't want to see you anymore part of the breakup letter. That's the we tried and we tried and we tried and we tried, and that is the have a good life, fuck off, don't contact me again.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and it's what's amazing about it is like they're not even talking. I mean, they're specifically talking about British people, like actual, just generic British people that they have tried to contact to be like, hey, can you put pressure on people? Can you? And none of them cared. So they're like, you know what? We tried to get all of you involved in this, and not one of you wanted to hear it. So you know what? You're all enemies now, all of you.
Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah, that one's the leveling of the fucking rifles is what that is, because it's like the fact that, you know, that you're enemies in war but in peace friends. But just the fact that they're like, we even tried to reach out, you know, to these aristocrats and stuff in Britain, and tried to let, you know, directly, and tried to talk to them, and none of them cared. So you know what? You're all our enemy now.
Yep. Well, we therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, and it's I have to point out here that that United is not capitalized, right? Because the United States of America was a confederation of states, with each state having its own authority, united together under a common under a common government.
Yeah, right? It was United States are plural before the American Civil War, because it was acknowledged that each one of them is essentially a mini country. They're just all confederated together.
Yeah, which is where the Articles of Confederation came in. The Articles of Confederation had much stronger language, and that limited the role of the federal government in the day-to-day lives of the states. The federal government in the Articles of Confederation was really nothing more than a magistrate or a negotiator between the states. Right? It was.
Yep, and that was limited. That was the point of like the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. The federal government was only supposed to get involved when there was a dispute between states.
Between states, yes.
Within each individual state, there should be no jurisdiction of the federal government.
Yeah, think of it like each state would have been its own country, and then the federal government would have been the glue that holds them together.
It would have been much closer to the way the European Union is.
Yeah, I was gonna make that example. Yeah. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of the colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of the right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the states of Great Britain ought to be totally dissolved, and that the free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor.
See, in that part, that is an important part. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Because remember, when this gets written, they don't know that they're going to win.
Yes.
History hasn't been written yet. They have no idea. They may all lose. And if they lose, they know what that means. If you're unsure what that means, go ahead and take a look at what happened in Ireland when Ireland tried to rebel in 1916 against the British, and they lost at the post office because they chose the one federal building that was within long-range gun range from battleships, like a bunch of numpties. But what the British did is they then, after they won and they rounded up all of the leaders, they then executed them one by one.
Yep. And here's something else that needs to be said. Of the 56 signers of the Declaration, 8 of them were actually born in the UK, so they weren't they weren't American or colonial by birth.
Yep. And the fourth signature on the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock, legendarily written extra large, quote, so that King George might read it without his glasses. Yep. That dude had some fucking balls. Fucking balls. Let's see, I'm looking through all of the signers. The signers, there's 1, 2, 3 from New Hampshire, 6 from Massachusetts, 2 from Rhode Island, 4 from Connecticut, 4 from New York, 5 from New Jersey.
Richard Stockton, by the way, from New Jersey. He actually later recanted.
Really?
Yeah.
9 from Pennsylvania, 3 from Delaware, 4 from Maryland. Charles Carroll of Carrollton. I kind of like that. That's the way his name is written, is Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Yeah. And keep in mind, most of these people, when they say fortunes, they mean generally like luck and stuff and futures, but they also do mean fortunes. Most of these people are incredibly wealthy.
Of the 56 men who signed the Declaration, and 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors and tortured to death. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost the sons in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships during the war.
Yep.
24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers.
An entire cross section of the colonies. We're all like, yep, fuck these guys. Yep. We quit. The other thing too is like one of them, Francis Lightfoot Lee. Yep. His brother was Light Horse Harry Lee, and Light Horse Harry Lee's grandson was Robert E. Lee.
Yeah. Let's see. Carter Braxton of Virginia, wealthy planter and trader, saw his ships swept to seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts and died in rags. Thomas McLean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family around almost constantly. He served in Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward. Vandals or soldiers or both looted the properties of Elmery, Clary, Harry, or Hall, Walton, Gwinnett, Howard, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had taken over Nelson's home for his headquarters. The owner quietly urged General George Washington to open fire. The home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died within a few months.
Yeah, these guys, by signing this document, they were not something they were doing lightly. Like, this isn't an academic exercise that they're doing here. This is by doing this, bad things are going to happen.
John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his grain mill were laid to waste. For more than a year, he lived in the forest and caves, returning home to find his wife dead and children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Norris and Livingston also suffered similar fates.
Yeah, a lot of them died very, very, very bad deaths.
Fuck, that's fucking brutal.
And they knew what they were getting into. Like, that's the thing that, like, every time I talk about the Declaration of Independence and you know, the treason/rebellion day in the United States, I bring up that these guys were very much aware that they were probably signing their own death warrants. There was no certainty that you were going to win. There was no no guarantee that you weren't going to be tortured, that you weren't going to be drawn and quartered, which was the prescribed punishment for treason.
Yeah, and you were lucky if you were hung.
Yeah, being hung was probably the best thing you could hope, or dying in battle.
They at this point in time, they were still like tying people to the post and time in the middle of the city square, and whipping them as punishment.
Yeah, and that was a lighter form of punishment than what these guys were going to be facing. I mean, being drawn and quartered involves having your intestines cut out and burned, and your body being cut into pieces.
Yeah,
so that's fun.
William
these
Wallace into Braveheart.
That's drawing and quartering. Wallace actually suffered more than you see in Braveheart too, because he got short dropped, and then he got drawn and quartered, and then he got released from the short drop, and then something. They really did a number on Wallace, but the fate that these guys were facing was not an undaunting one. There was certainly no guarantee that any of them were going to survive and that they were going to win. And they didn't even have an army yet. They hadn't actually even put an army together. They hadn't figured any of this out. They just knew, we're fucking done with them. We're moving on. This is stupid. We're not dealing with this anymore. That's all they knew for sure. And they didn't have any roadmap to success, and there was no guarantee, and yet they did it anyway. Because it was the right thing to do. Because there's a point when men of conscience can no longer tolerate what a tyrant is doing to them and their neighbors. And they had hit that point. They'd rather die than keep dealing with it. I mean, the fucking balls.
Massive balls.
The fucking balls to be like, yeah, we don't even actually have an army yet, and we don't really know like how we're gonna pay for this, and we don't really know like if we're gonna win, and we also definitely know what's going to happen to us if we lose, but we're gonna do this anyway. That takes serious fucking balls. Serious fucking balls.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to find this quote. I'm not ignoring you, Andrew. I'm really seriously trying to find this quote real quick. That goes along with what you're saying.
I wasn't even sure you could hear me over all the kabooms outside right now.
No, I can hear you. Let's see. Damn it, man. I hate when I can't find a quote I'm looking for. It really makes me angry when I can't find a quote that I'm looking for. But I'm pretty sure it was a Samuel Adams quote, and he said something along the lines of that the revolution wasn't in fact before the war ever started. The revolution was a change in the mind's beliefs and the disposition of the colonists, and that's what this letter is. That's what this was putting those emotions that they were so fed up with this usurpation on their personal liberties, on their ability to govern themselves. They were so just done with the tyranny that they felt that they were willing to throw off the yoke of tyranny and to go to war. They knew what this letter was going to cause, right? I mean, this letter wasn't, the King George wasn't going to read the letter and be like, oh well, fuck, I guess I'll just leave them alone. That's
yeah, they were under no illusions. Yeah, they were under no illusions about how Georgie Boy was going to react to this. I mean, they also knew, like, they were well aware that the reason they were being taxed was because George didn't have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. They were well aware of that.
Well, he was an empire builder.
Well, not only that, but he'd been fighting, the 100 Years' War with France, which was not cheap. Again, Britain's economy is entirely dependent on it grabbing more colonies at this point. So the crown didn't have much money. They knew that. They didn't know how little until much later. They're already a couple of years into the war before they find out that the answer is actually basically none. They're completely broke. But they did know that. They knew that George, because of that, George was definitely not going to let them go quietly. And that and remember, these guys had lived their lives as British subjects. Most of them spoke with a British accent. That's one of those things that lots of films get wrong about the American colonists. They had British accents. They were British. They had British accents, guys.
Okay, I found it. The revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the hearts and minds of the people, a change in their religious sentiments of their duties and obligations. This radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people was the real American Revolution.
Which founding father said that?
This says it's Adams, John Adams.
John Adams? Okay.
I thought it was Samuel Adams.
No, John, who is the lawyer who defended the British soldiers at the trial. That's, if you want to see a really good representation of it, actually, the TV show John Adams, where it's I forget the name of that actor who plays Paul Giamatti. Paul Giamatti plays John Adams. And
John Adams said it. That's in a letter to Ezekiel Niles, 13th of February, 1818.
Yeah, John was actually a very, very impressive founding father. I mean, pretty consistently, most of them are actually really impressive. Like, the more you learn about them, the more you go, what? Like the amount of languages they spoke, and their the things that they say are just super impressive, and they're just men of conscience and men of principle, and the way that they say things is amazing, and they're just really impressive guys. And I'd hope that I could speak half as well as some of them did, because some of their speeches are just incredible.
If we as a society were 1/10 the man they were, we would not be in the situation that we're in.
We wouldn't be. And honestly, if we were a tenth of the men they were, their shooting would have started 20 years ago.
Yeah.
If not 50 years ago.
Ben Stone has a few lines about that in Sedition, Subversion, Sabotage.
Yeah. And these guys, and it's not like they're perfect, right? Like, don't get me wrong. The founding fathers.
They were slave owners. Okay, we get it. Yeah. Okay.
They're slave owners. Benjamin Franklin was just a dirty, dirty old man. So dirty. Seriously, holy crap. Like, I generally count myself as a degenerate, but that man, I can't even come close. There's stories of like this rundown castle on this island and these like weird sex ritual things and orgies, and
that's what where we're getting at. Where we're getting at is that the letter is awesome.
They were, but what I'm getting at is they're just men.
The people were just men, and
they're not. Some of them
are dirty, creepy old men.
Yeah, they're not superheroes. They're not perfect. They have flaws. They were real people, and they were
lawyers and farmers and merchants.
Yeah, they were real people who lived real lives.
They weren't politicians by nature.
Yeah, the majority of some of them were, but the majority of them.
They were statesmen, not politicians.
George Washington, the only reason he had money is because of Martha, because he married a rich widow for her money, and because his brother died and left it all to him. But he himself basically never did much. He just got a bunch of money by marrying into it and inheriting it. That was it. I mean,
that sounds familiar.
Yeah. But a lot of people don't realize that about Washington. Like he actually didn't really ever do much. He married Martha Washington for money for the most part, and he inherited a bunch of money from his brother and the plantation from his brother. He totally owned a bunch of slaves.
Yep. Thank God he turned down the kinghood.
Yeah, he was a true aristocrat. Like, he would have, if Washington had gone to Britain in the early 1770s, he would have rubbed shoulders with British aristocrats and would have not been out of place at all. He spoke like a British aristocrat. He dressed like a British aristocrat. He behaved like a British aristocrat. He was, however, lucky for the United States, a really pretty decent military commander. And, a big chunk of being a good military commander is just surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you, who are better at their jobs than you could ever be. And he was really good at picking people out for that. So he was really good at being like, you seem like you're probably pretty good at field command. Hey, you look like you're really good for artillery. Hey, you look like you're really good at running spies. And he was right every time. They were really good at what they did. And so he didn't have to be that good because he was just really good at picking a team.
Like, was it good leaders delegate, right?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, and that is a lot of what Washington did. Now, Washington also was just very inspirational to his men. He didn't have to do much. Like, he read
the Declaration, and they tore down the statue and made bullets out of it.
Yeah, and he didn't really have to do much, honestly. Like, Washington is generally regarded, and some of the things that he said, and like he did understand the gravity of who he was. Right. That he was the celebrity that he was, and the kind of person that people looked at him as, and that he had to live up to that. He did understand that. But he also didn't really have to do a whole lot even during the war, actually, because he had enough people around him who were just really fucking good at their jobs that he didn't really.
He stood up in a boat and they painted him.
Yeah. But the thing is that's when you're that high in military leadership, when you're running an army from that level, that is the best possible quality you can have, is that you can put together a really, really solid, really competent team, and you can inspire everybody to do their best. And that's what he did. And that's what makes him still a really fucking great military commander. He wasn't necessarily a brilliant strategist, because he wasn't. He actually lost more battles than he won significantly. He had his entire army almost quit multiple times. He, got battered and bloodied repeatedly. But he could inspire everybody to keep going. And that is what separated him and a lot of the founding fathers from mere mortals, if you will, is that they inspired people.
Just for shits and giggles, real quick, and for the people that are new to this, give them your military history and your degree.
So I have a bachelor's in military history and tactics, and from Trinity in Dublin, and I have a background with the United States military in the 75th Rangers, as well as 3rd Special Forces Group. I did some contract work for them for a few years in a few places, doing things for people. So I have an extensive background in the infantry in particular, and a really pretty extensive background in knowing military history and knowing what makes somebody a good commander, what wins battles, what loses battles.
Yeah. Andrew was giddy when I brought up the idea for this episode, to the point where he showed up on camera wearing a vest and a tri-corner hat.
Yep, my tri-corner George Washington hat. It's actually modeled. It's not, very high quality reproduction or anything else, and now it's covered in shit because I threw it on the floor quickly to get out of my way. But my hat is actually modeled on one that Washington actually wore, famously, and I had my full plate carrier on with my meme-based insurgent patch and stuff. So yeah, the 4th of July is really exciting for me because, even as an anarchist, because I cannot reinforce enough, like, these guys, as they're writing the Declaration of Independence, they don't know they're going to win. They have every reason to believe they're all going to be dead in a year, brutally killed, and their family farms and things and their businesses all taken away from them, their loved ones thrown into the street. They have every reason to believe that that's probably going to be how this ends. They just didn't care.
Yeah. And I'm going to make the boiling frog analogy here. At that point in time, they had so much personal liberty that everything that the military did, that King George III issued, that the local magistrates, the local British magistrates issued, everything raised that water temperature real fast. And it got to the point where the water was too hot and it was time to jump out of the pot. They were more under British rule. They had more freedom at its most tyrannical point in 1776, right before the war, right before the Declaration of Independence, than any person alive in the United States has ever experienced.
Mm-hmm.
That should say something about the frog boiling. Like, we've been slowly boiling for a long time. They boiled really fast, and we're simmering away.
Well, yeah, and the funny thing is, and I love to bring this up because everybody gets timelines wrong when it comes to history. It's so easy to get timelines wrong, and not just the order of events, but the gaps between events they get wrong. There is a solid 25 years between when things really start to get nasty in the colonies and the Declaration of Independence. There's 16 years between the Stamp Act and the Declaration of Independence. 16 years. Huge gap, really, really big set of years there for lots of things to happen before they get to the point the Declaration of Independence happens. And the war isn't truly over for 10 years. It takes a very, very long time to then win that war.
Yeah, and
so
1776. I mean, the Constitution wasn't written until what, 89?
1789
wasn't officially ratified until 91.
Yep.
Or no, the Bill of Rights was ratified in 91.
Well, it was the first part of the Constitution was ratified. But yeah, the official end. Let me just double check because I don't want to. Now that I've been outed as an expert, I don't want to get this wrong. So
just remember, Jason, not the expert. Andrew's the expert.
The end of the American Revolution is 1783, right? So just shy of 10 years, just a couple of years shy. 8 years worth of fighting. Really 8.5, roughly. Before cessation of hostilities. So between the Stamp Act and the end of the Revolutionary War is 24 years. That is a much bigger time frame than I think most people, especially who had public educations in high school where they learned about American history, and as far as they went. You don't realize 24 years. And most of these guys, as they're signing the Declaration of Independence, as they're leading these armies into battle for the first time, they're 22. Thomas Jefferson, I think, was 24. Washington was in his 20s. Jefferson was in his 20s. Adams was in his 20s. Everybody's like in their mid 20s, early 20s, maybe early 30s. But really, Franklin is definitely the old man of the group.
Yeah, the Revolutionary War was actually longer than either World War I or World War II.
Mm-hmm.
No.
It was extremely long. In fact, it was about as long as American involvement in both World War I and World War II combined.
No.
So it's a very, very long war. It's a long, drawn out thing. And then you hit the War of 1812, and the War of 1812, again, people hear 1812, but consider 1783 to 1812, not a particularly long time. That's less than 30 years. And so that's not a very, very long time. And then right after that, after the War of 1812 is when you start getting into other conflicts for the United States. And there's, the Mexican-American War. Keep in mind, there's only 87 years between the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address. That's that 7 years, right? A score is 20 years, in case anyone was curious and you hadn't figured that out. In case math was hard. So there's only 87 years, less than 100 years between the Declaration of Independence and the Gettysburg Address. And, you have the United States involved in World War I before all of the soldiers of the Civil War are gone. And we have photos of people who served in the Revolutionary War. Photography had already developed before they were all gone. Like, that's how young the United States is. That's how compressed this timeline actually is here, is that, you have this, what can be considered a very long span of time, but then you also consider photography was developed before everybody who served actively in combat in the Revolutionary War was gone. That is a compressed freaking timeline. There is, Robert E. Lee, who is quite old in the Civil War, is the grandson of Light Horse Henry Lee from the Revolutionary War. Both he and his brother had signed the Declaration of Independence. And then there's Robert E. Lee, and then Robert E. Lee is his kids are still hanging around, very much so, in World War I. Like, you're only at his grandkids by the time you hit World War II.
That's sad. That's sad. This country is only 250 years old, and It went from like the beacon of freedom fighting off the usurpers to give me 35% of your income and put on the mask or get shot in the face.
Well, they say the star that shines the brightest shines the shortest, right? Or burns the brightest, burns the shortest, whatever. Candles, stars, whatever you want to use. There's multiple variations of that phrase. No. But that's kind of America. Like America started out with, it was a true experiment. Because remember, when America gets founded, right? When people like to point to the Magna Carta as the basis for the Constitution, if you actually read the Magna Carta, no. It really wasn't. So you have, this entirely untried idea coming out when America gets founded. And unfortunately, that great experiment that was the United States is an utter failure.
Yeah.
It's an utter failure. So. It just descended into tyranny all over again.
Worse. Multitudes worse.
Well, famously,
why under King George III.
Yeah, why should I trade one tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away?
Yep.
And that's exactly what we did. And guess which one is far more likely to truly infringe on your freedom?
Yep.
Every single day. The latter of the two.
Yep. So, all right. We beat this horse. Throw out your links. Let's get out of here.
Oh, check out Avante Creo. It's just www.avantecreo.com and use code Anarchist 25. Get 25% off your purchases there for fashion streetwear. You can also go to Shop Valerio and get 25% off also with code Anarchist 25 there. And you can go to thebeardstruggle.com, get beard care products, use code Anarchist 15, get 15% off of your beard care products from them. Make sure to buy Derica's book, Think for Yourself. It's a workbook, people. Workbook for beginners. Just remember that. That's available on Amazon. Links in the description. Also check out Poppins Patches. They make awesome patches. They're all cool. They're all vinyl. They're awesome. Make sure that you check out Road to Autonomy magazine. Did I forget anything?
Rumble.
Yes, we are on Rumble now.
And MeWe.
Yes, we have a page on MeWe. We have a we upload to Rumble. We also I have Inked Anarchist Hootenanny Roundup 2, which is now a group rather than a page on MeWe, so that other people can submit their big Ice House party memes to it. I'm also now on Twitter, the Inked Anarchist. You can find me on MeWe, the Inked Anarchist.
You've been on Twitter, but you're actually finally active on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm finally active on Twitter because I got permabanned from Facebook, which is weird because apparently people are telling me that I'm showing up on Facebook. Like they can tag me and stuff, but I can't see anything. Every time I go, it just gives me the "you appealed our decision" page, and I can't actually. And if I sit there for a second, then it shows me that meme from back in August of 2020 that I got banned for, permabanned for finally. And then I hit continue and it just spins and spins and spins and never does anything. So I don't actually have any access to Facebook at all anymore. Which, doesn't surprise me because I am the extremist that Facebook warned you about.
I still haven't got that warning.
Perhaps you are the extremist.
It's a badge I wear proudly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my patch on my hat that I'm wearing tonight is the "Stay Clear, Probable Drone Target."
Oh. Patch, I have the dumpster fire patch. I thought that was a little more appropriate than a Wolverine's. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and that's the thing too is the tri-corner hat and everything. You have the Tea Party of the Republicans who wear the tri-corner hats and talk a big game about the revolution and supporting revolutionary ideals and all this. But at the end of the day, no, they fucking do not. And
yep, it is what it is. Fucking psychos.
Yeah, that's Everybody loves to talk about being revolutionary until it's time to do revolutionary shit.
Yes. Go read the DOI. Go get permission to yeet your oppressors.
Yeah. Also, hey, read Sedition, Subversion, and Sabotage. Field Manual number 1.
Yep. Available for free. PDF download.
Yeah. You don't even have to pay for it. Just read it.
You can find that shit on Amazon now.
Yeah, just read it, man. That's where I ordered mine, was Amazon.
So
yeah.
All right. On that note, you got anything else?
Nope. And I can't hear myself think over all of the bangs and pops and snaps and crackles right next door. So.
Yep. They're still going on. It's 8:15 p.m. on the West Coast. It's still light outside and they're going off.
I mean, every time I hear them go off, I'm like, America. But and I do have, to be fair, I have a permit to be able to buy the really the professionally sized stuff, and I have previously done that, and then I almost blew up my daughter and Lindsay last year. I mean,
that would not have been that. No.
Well, yeah, I had a minor heart attack, but they installed one of the tubes for one of the 400 gram mortar case that I got upside down.
Oh,
so fired into the ground and then ricocheted off. Yeah, that was fun.
So yeah, and don't forget that the fireworks you're going to blow up tonight are reminiscent of the cannons and musket fire that were shot into your oppressors.
Yeah, don't forget, as you fire off those mortars, you watch those things explode. They represent detonating cannonballs fired into the fucking face of tyrants.
On that note, this has been episode 141 in Minecraft. Please don't join us. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Yep.